Day I found out I was getting $2.3 million, the first thing I felt wasn't joy. It was the strange, quiet panic, like the moment before a car alarm goes off and you already know something's wrong but you can't say why yet. My attorney, Mr. Hewitt, slid the settlement paperwork across the conference table and said, "Congratulations, Simone, it's over." I stared at the number on the page. $2,312,500. After 3 years of fighting the company that destroyed my left knee, after 2 surgeries, after sitting in depositions where their lawyers made me feel like I'd imagined the whole thing, it was over. I shook his hand. I walked to my car. I sat in the parking garage for a good 15 minutes just breathing. I didn't call anyone. Not my mother, not my sister, not my best friend. I just sat there, staring at the concrete pillar in front of me, thinking about all the people who disappeared during those 3 years. All the people who said they believed me right up until it became inconvenient for them. I thought about my ex-husband Trey, who told me I was obsessed with the lawsuit and that I needed to let it go and get a real job. I thought about how he'd said that 6 weeks before I found out he'd been sleeping with someone from his office. I had filed for divorce 11 months ago. The settlement came through 4 days after our divorce was finalized. The timing was almost funny. I drove home to my apartment, a small 2-bedroom in Charlotte, North Carolina, that I'd been renting since I moved out of the house Trey and I had shared. My knee ached on the drive, the way it always did when rain was coming. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on the couch, and let myself feel it for exactly 1 hour. The relief, the exhaustion, the grief underneath all of it, because winning doesn't erase what you lost getting there. Then I called Mr. Hewitt back and told him I wanted to be careful about who knew. He said that was wise. I meant to keep it quiet for a while. Just a few weeks until I figured out what I was doing with the money, until I had a plan. I hadn't told a single person outside of my legal team. My mother thought the case was still ongoing. My sister thought the same. Even my closest friend Laurel, who had driven me to every single physical therapy appointment for 8 months, she didn't know. I was careful. I was so careful. And then my mother called. She called on a Tuesday evening, which was normal enough. We talked twice a week, usually about nothing, her garden, her book club, a neighbor who was causing drama in the HOA. But that Tuesday she sounded different, lighter somehow, and at the same time oddly careful about her words. She asked how I was feeling, how my knee was doing, whether I was keeping busy. And then, almost at the end of the call, she mentioned that my sister had been asking about me. My sister's name is Dania. Dania is 3 years older than me. She married well. Her husband, Corbin, works in commercial real estate and they live in a nice house in Ballantyne, the kind of suburb where every lawn is professionally maintained and every car in the driveway costs more than some people's annual salary. Dania and I have never been particularly close. Not in the way you see in movies, where sisters are each other's best friends. We're cordial. We have Christmas together. We text occasionally. But Dania has always carried this quiet resentment toward me that I could never quite explain, like she decided early on that I was competition rather than family. When my mother said Dania had been asking about me, something small and cold moved through my chest. "What was she asking?" I said. My mother paused just a half-second too long. "Oh, just wondering how you were doing, if the lawsuit had settled yet." I said something non-committal and changed the subject. But after I hung up, I sat there for a long time thinking about that pause. Dania didn't ask about me when I was recovering from my first surgery. She sent a card, which was something, I suppose. But she didn't call, didn't offer to help, didn't come by even though she lived 40 minutes away. When I was at my lowest. When I was on crutches and couldn't drive and was surviving on whatever Laurel and a few other friends brought over. Dania was busy with her life. Too busy to check in. Too busy to ask. And now she was asking about my lawsuit. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I didn't know anything for certain, that maybe she'd genuinely turned over a new leaf, that people changed. I talked myself down from the ledge. I went to bed. 3 days later, she called me directly. "Simone," she said, and her voice was warm in that particular way Dania's voice gets when she wants something. "I feel like we've been so out of touch. I've been thinking about you so much. How are you doing, really?" We talked for almost an hour. She was charming and funny and self-deprecating in all the right places. She brought up memories from our childhood, the good ones, the ones that make you feel like maybe you've been wrong about someone this whole time. By the end of the call, I'd agreed to come to her house for dinner the following Saturday. I hung up and stood in my kitchen feeling warm and a little foolish for all my suspicion. I should have trusted the suspicion. Dinner at Dania's house was the kind of production she excelled at. The table was set like something out of a magazine. She'd made a roast, the expensive kind, and there was a bottle of wine that I knew cost more than my weekly grocery budget during the lean years. Corbin was there, attentive and charming, filling my glass before it was empty, asking thoughtful questions about my recovery. Halfway through dinner, Dania looked at me with this expression I can only describe as practiced tenderness, and she said, I have to be honest with you. I know the settlement came through. I put my fork down. I'm not upset, she said quickly, holding up one hand. I just want you to know that I know, and I want you to know that I'm here for you. However you need me. Family is family. I looked at her, then I looked at Corbin. He was focused on his plate with the very specific focus of a man who has been told to stay out of it. How do you know? I asked. She waved a hand. It doesn't matter. What matters is. It matters to me, I said. How do you know, Dania? There was a pause. Then she said that one of Corbin's colleagues knew someone at the court, that things had been mentioned, that she hadn't gone looking for the information. It had just come to her. The explanation shifted and changed slightly each time she repeated it, the way lies do. I picked my fork back up. I finished my dinner. I was polite for the rest of the evening. On the drive home, I called Mr. Hewitt and told him I needed to understand exactly who had access to information about my settlement and whether there was any legal concern about how it had been obtained. He said he'd look into it. He also said, very carefully, that settlement amounts in civil cases were sometimes accessible through public court filings, and that there wasn't necessarily anything sinister about someone finding the information. I knew that. I also knew Dania. The call started after that. Not every day, she was smarter than that, but regularly, 2 or 3 times a week. She started dropping things into conversation. She mentioned that Corbin's business had been going through some challenges. She mentioned that they'd been looking at refinancing. She mentioned that they'd been planning a trip for their anniversary, but that timing was complicated right now. Each thing was small. Each thing on its own was nothing. Together they formed a picture I recognized very clearly. She wanted money. She hadn't asked yet, not directly, but I'd grown up with this woman. I knew how she built toward things. She was laying the groundwork, brick by brick, and when she finally made her ask, it would come packaged in the language of family and love and everything we'd shared, and it would be very hard to say no without feeling like a monster. I talked to Laurel about it. Laurel, who had been there through all of it, the injury, the surgeries, the divorce, the long dark stretch where I wasn't sure I was going to be okay, listened to everything I said, and then was quiet for a moment. What does your gut tell you? She asked. That this has nothing to do with actually wanting a relationship with me, I said. Then you have your answer. I decided I wasn't going to lie to Dania. I wasn't going to pretend the money didn't exist, or that I hadn't noticed what she was doing. But I also wasn't going to volunteer anything, and I wasn't going to let the warmth she was performing crack something open in me that I'd spent years carefully sealing shut. What I hadn't prepared for was my mother. My mother is not a bad person. I want to be very clear about that, because what comes next could make her sound like one, and she isn't. She is a woman who spent 30 years keeping peace in a family where peace required constant maintenance, and she learned certain habits along the way. One of those habits was smoothing things over. Another was gently, persistently nudging people toward forgiveness before they were ready for it. She called me on a Wednesday. The conversation started normally. And then she said, almost as an aside, Dania mentioned you two had a lovely dinner. She seems so excited about reconnecting. I said. She's had a hard year, you know. Corbin's business. I know, Mom. She's told me. A pause. She loves you, Simone. She's just not always good at showing it. I didn't say anything. I think, my mother started again. I think it would mean so much to her if you could extend some grace right now. Given everything you've come into. There it was. Given everything you've come into. She hadn't meant it the way it landed, or maybe she had, and she just hadn't meant for it to sound so plain. Either way, I heard it clearly, now that you have money. Share it with your sister. I told my mother I loved her. I told her I needed to think about some things. I got off the phone and sat very still for a while. I'm not going to tell you I handled everything that came next perfectly. I didn't. There was a period of about 2 weeks where I was angry in a way that felt like it was coming from somewhere deeper than just Dania's phone calls or my mother's gentle pressuring. It was the cumulative weight of it, the years of absence, the silence when I was struggling, and then the sudden reappearance the moment there was something worth showing up for. It made me feel like a resource rather than a person. Like a problem that had resolved itself into an opportunity. I stopped answering Dania's calls. Not forever, just for a while. I needed space to think clearly. Then Dania showed up at my apartment. She didn't call first. She just appeared at my door on a Sunday afternoon, dressed nicely, carrying a bakery box from the good place downtown that I used to love before it became too expensive for my post-divorce budget. I opened the door and looked at her for a moment. "Can I come in?" she said. I let her in. I'm still not sure why. Maybe I needed to hear what she would actually say when she'd run out of runway for the slow approach. We sat at my kitchen table with the pastries between us, and she talked for a while about nothing. About Mom, about a mutual cousin's engagement, about a show she'd been watching. And then she went quiet, and when she looked up, her eyes were wet. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to hear me out before you respond." I waited. "Corbin and I are in trouble," she said. "Real trouble. Not just the refinancing thing, I mean the kind of trouble where we might lose the house." Her voice caught. "I've been so scared, Simone. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to tell anyone. And then I found out about your settlement, and I thought, she's my sister. If I can't ask my sister, who can I ask?" She wiped her eyes. She asked me for $200,000. $200,000. She said it quickly, like she'd been rehearsing it. She said it was a loan, that they would pay it back, that she had a timeline and a plan and she could show me documents. She said she knew it was a lot to ask, but that I could afford it, that it wouldn't even make a dent, that this was exactly the kind of moment families were supposed to show up for each other. I listened to all of it. And I thought about 2019, when I was on crutches after my first surgery and she sent a card. I thought about the 8 months Laurel drove me to physical therapy while Dania posted vacation photos on Instagram. I thought about the divorce, when I was sleeping on an air mattress in Laurel's spare room and eating cereal for dinner. And Dania called once, for 11 minutes, and then didn't call again for 6 weeks. I thought about the word she just used, afford. "I need to think about it," I said. She looked relieved. She squeezed my hand across the table. She said she understood, that she wasn't trying to pressure me, that she trusted me. She left the pastries. I called Mr. Hewitt the next morning. I didn't ask him for advice about Dania. That wasn't his department. But I did ask him to help me put certain protections in place. I'd been meaning to do it anyway. I set up a trust. I moved the bulk of the settlement funds into accounts that weren't easily visible or accessible. I got my estate paperwork updated. I wasn't planning to disappear or cut anyone off. I was just making sure that whatever I decided to do with my money, it was my decision, made clearly, without pressure or manipulation or the particular emotional leverage that only family knows how to apply. When I'd finished all of that, I felt something settle in my chest. A kind of steadiness I hadn't felt since before the injury. I called Dania. She answered on the second ring, which told me she'd been waiting. "I've been thinking about what you asked me," I said. "Simone, let me finish." I took a breath. "I've been thinking about it, and I've also been thinking about the last few years. I've been thinking about my surgery, and my divorce, and the 18 months where I was genuinely not okay and you were living your life. Which is fine. You don't owe me your presence during hard times. But I need you to understand something, neither do I." She was quiet. "I'm not going to give you $200,000, I said. "Not as a loan, not as a gift. I'm not going to do it. Not because I can't, but because I've spent 3 years watching who shows up and who doesn't, and I've learned something about what I owe people and what I don't. Simone, that's... I love you, I said, and I meant it, which made it harder. I genuinely hope you and Corbin figure out your situation. But I can't be the solution to a problem that didn't exist to you until you found out I had money to solve it. She hung up. My mother called 4 hours later. The call did not go well. She said things that were unkind and then immediately tried to walk them back, which is somehow worse than just saying the unkind things and owning them. I told her I wasn't angry at her and that I needed some time and that I would call her when I was ready. I sat in my apartment that night with the lights on and the TV off, just sitting with it. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from doing the right thing, not the dramatic kind from movies, where someone makes a noble sacrifice and the music swells. Just the quiet, ordinary loneliness of having made a clear decision and knowing it was correct and still feeling the weight of it. Laurel came over. She didn't ask how I was. She just showed up with Thai food and sat on my couch and we watched 3 episodes of a show we'd already seen. She didn't say anything about Danya. She didn't say anything about the money. She just stayed, which is the thing that matters. About a month later, something happened that I hadn't expected. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. When I did, it was a woman named Petra, who turned out to be the sister of one of Corbin's business partners. She'd heard through her own family's proximity to the situation that Corbin's business troubles were real, but that they were significantly less dire than Danya had represented to me. They were not about to lose the house. They had refinanced, yes, but the situation was, in Petra's words, tight, not catastrophic. I thanked her and sat with that information for a while. I don't know if Danya knew exactly how much she'd exaggerated or if she'd convinced herself the worst-case scenario was already here. People do that. They catastrophize their way into believing they deserve emergency help. Either way, the $200,000 she'd asked me for would not have saved a house that wasn't about to be lost. It would have done something else. Funded a recovery they didn't technically need, or something I couldn't see from where I was standing. What I knew was that my instincts had been right. It's been 7 months now since that conversation at my kitchen table. Danya and I haven't spoken since she hung up on me. My mother and I have talked. Carefully, with a new kind of formality that I hope softens eventually. She hasn't brought up Danya or the money again, which I think means she's processing something even if she won't say it out loud. I've done some things with the settlement money that feel true to who I am. I paid off my own debt, the medical bills that had accumulated over 3 years, the credit cards I'd run up during the divorce, when I had no income and too much pride to ask for help. I set aside a fund for Laurel, not as a gift exactly, but as a safety net that she has access to if she ever needs it, because she was there in the way family is supposed to be and she deserves to know someone has her back the way she had mine. I bought myself a better car because my knee genuinely makes it hard to drive certain vehicles, and I'd been stubborn about it for too long. And I made a donation to the rehabilitation center where I did most of my physical therapy. Not a named donation, nothing public, just money going quietly toward the place that helped rebuild something that had been broken. My knee still aches when rain is coming. Some things don't fully heal, they just become manageable. You learn to read the signals, adjust accordingly. Stop being surprised when a discomfort returns. I think that's true of more than just injuries. I'm not angry at Danya anymore, not in the sharp way I was at first. What I feel now is closer to something like clarity. I know who she is. I know what I am to her and what I'm not. There's a strange peace in that kind of knowing, even when it's the knowing you didn't want. The settlement bought me time to heal correctly, to make choices from a place of stability rather than desperation, to figure out what I actually want my life to look like now that I'm not just surviving it. I thought about calling Danya once. It was late, I'd had 1 glass of wine and I was feeling some version of generous toward the idea of her. I picked up my phone and sat there looking at her name. Then I put the phone down. Some doors, once you've closed them quietly and with full clarity, don't need to be reopened. Not because you hate what's on the other side, but because you finally, after everything, learned what you deserve to walk through. I keep coming back to that bakery box. She carried it in like a prop, like the right pastries from the right place could paper over 3 years of silence. And what really gets me, is that it almost worked. I saw the box and felt something soften in me before I'd even made a conscious decision. That's how long I'd wanted my sister to show up, long enough that when she finally did, even the wrong version of it nearly fooled me. That's the thing nobody tells you about being let down by family. It doesn't make you stop wanting them. It just teaches you, slowly and painfully, to tell the difference between someone returning and someone arriving for the first time with an agenda. What Dania did wasn't evil. I don't think she sat somewhere scheming. I think she genuinely convinced herself that asking me for money was a form of closeness, that needing something from me meant she was letting me in. But there's a version of intelligence that has nothing to do with being smart in school or clever in conversation. It's the ability to see clearly when you're being told a comfortable story. To ask, quietly, whose interests this narrative is actually serving. I'd spent years not using that ability with her. I wanted too badly for the story to be true. When I finally made the call and told her no, I wasn't running on anger. The anger had burned through weeks earlier. What I had left was something steadier, a kind of clear-eyed honesty about what I could offer her and what I couldn't, and why. That steadiness didn't come from nowhere. It came from 3 years of being knocked down and having to figure out, every time, how to get back up without anyone carrying me. The injury, the surgeries, the divorce, the long months of rebuilding something that felt completely dismantled. None of that was fair. None of it was what I would have chosen. But it built something in me that I don't think I could have built any other way. You find out what you're made of, not when things go right, but when they go wrong, and you still have to keep going. Laurel understood that. She showed up with food when I couldn't cook. She sat in waiting rooms. She drove without being asked. She didn't do any of that because I had anything to offer her. She did it because that's who she is. That's what it looks like when someone actually loves you, as opposed to loving the idea of what you might provide. The money didn't teach me that. The hard years did. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that the way I came into that settlement, slowly, with evidence, with years of showing up to depositions and appointments, and dark days when I wasn't sure it would ever resolve, that process shaped how I hold the outcome. I didn't chase shortcuts. I didn't let people talk me out of what I knew was true. I stayed honest about what had happened to me even when it was exhausting to keep saying so. And when it finally came through, I didn't owe the result to anyone who hadn't been there. That's the part Dania missed. You don't get to claim the harvest if you weren't there for the planting. I'm not the same person I was before the injury. I'm quieter in some ways, more deliberate. I know the value of showing up, because I know exactly what it cost when people didn't. I know what I owe people who were present. And I know what I owe people who were present, and I know, with equal clarity, what I don't owe people who weren't. Closing that chapter didn't require hating anyone. It just required telling the truth to Dania, to my mother, and most importantly, to myself. That's the only thing I've ever found that actually holds.